Welcome to the channel Coinexa USA, and let me ask you something before we dive in. Have you ever held a penny in your hand and thought, this tiny little coin, this 1 cent piece of copper that most people drop on the sidewalk and never bother to pick up, could actually be worth more than a mansion, more than a yacht, more than most people will ever earn in their entire lifetime? Because today, that is exactly what we are talking about, and I need you to stay with me right here on this channel because what you are about to discover is going to completely change the way you look at every single penny you ever touch again. We are starting with the 1990 Lincoln Penny, a coin so deceptively ordinary, so perfectly disguised as everyday pocket change, that millions of people have already spent it, tossed it, lost it, without ever realizing what was sitting right there in the palm of their hand. And the number attached to this coin? $13 million. Yes, you heard that absolutely right, $13 million for a penny, a 1-cent coin that was minted in Denver, Colorado in the year 1990, a year that most of us remember for other things entirely. And yet this coin, this tiny copper disc, has become one of the most talked about, most searched for, most desperately hunted coins in the entire history of American numismatics. Now, before I go any further, I want you to do me one favor, stay right here until the very end of this video, because after the 1990D, we have 4 more Lincoln pennies lined up for you today, each one more valuable than the last, each one more shocking, more unbelievable, and I promise you, by the time we reach the final coin on this list, your jaw is going to be on the floor because the numbers get bigger, the stories get wilder, and the chances that one of these coins is sitting right now in your home, in your drawer, in an old jar on your shelf are far greater than you could ever imagine. So do not go anywhere, because you absolutely cannot afford to miss what is coming. But right now, let us go deep into the world of the 1990 Lincoln Penny, and let me tell you everything you need to know about why this coin, this seemingly insignificant little piece of American currency, carries a price tag that would make even the wealthiest collectors in the world stop and stare. The year was 1990, and the Denver Mint was operating at full capacity, producing hundreds of millions of pennies to meet the demand of a country that consumed coinage at a staggering rate. Every single day, the Mint was punching out coins by the billions, feeding them into the vast river of American commerce, and nobody, absolutely nobody working the production line that year had any reason to think that anything unusual was happening. The machines were running, the dies were stamping, the coins were rolling out in perfectly acceptable condition, and yet, somewhere in that enormous industrial process, something went wrong, something small, something subtle, something that the quality control inspectors somehow failed to catch, and that tiny little mistake, that microscopic deviation from standard procedure, is exactly what transformed an ordinary 1990 Lincoln penny into a coin worth $13 million. Now let us talk about what makes the 1990D so extraordinarily rare, because it is not just one thing, it is a combination of factors, each one compounding the other, each one pushing the value higher and higher until you reach a number that defies all logic and reason. First, you have to understand the minting process itself, because when the Denver Mint produces a penny, it uses a carefully prepared die, a hardened steel tool engraved with the design that gets stamped onto each blank coin, and these dies are inspected, tested, and approved before they ever touch a single planchet. But in 1990, a small number of pennies came out of the Denver Mint with what collectors call a double die obverse, which means that the hub, the master tool used to create the working dies, made contact with the die more than once, and each subsequent impression was ever so slightly rotated or shifted from the previous one, creating a doubling effect on the letters, the date, and the portrait of Abraham Lincoln that is visible under magnification and sometimes even with the naked eye if you know exactly what you are looking for. This doubling, this mechanical ghost of a second impression, is not supposed to happen. It is a quality control failure, and precisely because it was a failure, precisely because only a tiny fraction of the coins struck that day carried this error, the 1990D double die obverse penny became an instant legend the moment collectors began identifying it. But wait, because the error type is only the beginning of the story, and we have to talk about the specific characteristics that separate the truly valuable 1990D pennies from the ordinary ones, because not every double die is created equal, and the numismatic world has developed an extraordinarily precise grading system to evaluate exactly how dramatic the doubling is, how well the coin was struck, how clean the surfaces are, whether the coin shows signs of circulation or whether it somehow survived in pristine mint state condition, and it is the combination of all of these factors working together that determines whether your 1990D is worth a few $100s or whether it is the specific specimen that carries the $13 million valuation that has made this coin legendary. The coins that reach the absolute top of the value spectrum are those graded MS 67 or higher by the major grading services, PCGS and NGC, meaning they are in nearly perfect mint state condition, with full red copper luster blazing across the surface, no bag marks, no contact marks, no signs of handling, just a coin that looks exactly as it did the moment it left the die, frozen in time, preserved by sheer luck or extraordinary care. A tiny copper miracle that somehow escaped the brutal reality of everyday circulation. Now let us talk about how collectors actually find these coins, because this is where the story gets truly exciting, truly emotional, truly human, because the discovery of a major error coin is never a quiet event. It is always a moment of pure shock, a moment where the world seems to stop turning and everything suddenly looks different. There are stories, verified, documented stories of people who found 1990 pennies and change they received at a grocery store, in rolls of coins purchased from a bank, in old coffee cans that sat forgotten in a garage for decades, in estate collections sorted through after a loved one passed away, and in each of these cases, the person holding the coin had absolutely no idea what they were looking at until they either showed it to a knowledgeable collector or took it to a coin dealer who immediately recognized the significance of what was sitting in front of them. Imagine, just imagine, the feeling in that moment, the rush of disbelief, the shaking hands, the voice that cannot quite form words, the slow dawning realization that your entire financial reality is about to change because of a penny. A single copper penny that you almost spent on a piece of gum or dropped into a tip jar without a second thought. That is the power of the 1990 Lincoln penny. And that is why tens of thousands of collectors around the world spend hours, literally hours, hunched over their coin collections with magnifying glasses, checking every single 1990 penny they can get their hands on, searching for that telltale doubling, that ghostly second impression that transforms a 1-cent coin into a life-changing fortune. The auction history of the 1990 is equally dramatic because when these coins come to market, they do not go quietly, they generate bidding wars, they attract attention from the most serious and deep-pocketed collectors in the world, and the prices they achieve are consistently jaw-dropping. Major auction houses have recorded multiple sales of high-grade 1990 error pennies that broke records at the time, each one pushing the ceiling higher, each one proving that the demand for this coin is not cooling down. It is intensifying, year after year, decade after decade, as fewer and fewer of the surviving specimens remain in uncirculated condition and more collectors compete for the coins that do. The $13 million figure represents the absolute pinnacle, the theoretical maximum value of the finest known example of this coin type in the highest achievable grade, and while not every 1990 is going to fetch that exact number, even lower-grade examples of the double-die variety have sold for sums that would astound the average person, and the key is simply knowing what to look for, knowing where to search, and understanding that the coin sitting right there in your hand might be the one that changes everything. I want you to really let that sink in because we live in a world where financial opportunities are supposed to be complicated, supposed to require expertise, supposed to be locked behind walls of privilege and access, and yet here is a coin, a penny, that could be found by anyone, anywhere, at any time in the most ordinary circumstances imaginable, and that is the magic of numismatics. That is why coin collecting has captivated human beings for centuries. Because the treasure hunt is real, the stakes are real, and the rewards are more real than anything you could ever imagine. Now, I told you at the beginning that we have 4 more coins coming after this one, and I meant every word because what comes next on our list is going to make the 1990 look like just the warm-up act, and trust me, you absolutely do not want to leave before you see what we have lined up for you. The values get bigger, the stories get more incredible, and the chances of one of these coins being in your possession right now are something that should have every single one of you reaching for your coin jar the moment this video ends. Stay with us, keep watching because the best is absolutely yet to come. Next, 1988 Lincoln penny, and if you thought $13 million was enough to make your head spin, then prepare yourself because what we are about to discuss is going to push everything you thought you knew about pennies even further into the realm of the absolutely unbelievable, because the 1988 Lincoln penny, in its most extraordinary and rarest known form, has been valued by top numismatic experts and elite collectors at a staggering $17 million. And the story behind how. A coin minted in 1988, just 2 short years before the one we just discussed, climbed to that astronomical figure is one of the most fascinating, most dramatic, and most emotionally charged stories in the entire world of coin collecting. Now, 1988 was a remarkable year in American history, a year of presidential elections, a year of cultural transformation, a year when the United States Mint was producing coins at a pace that reflected the enormous economic energy of the late 1980s, and like every year of production at the Mint, 1988 saw hundreds of millions of Lincoln pennies roll off the presses and flood into circulation across the country, disappearing into cash registers and piggy banks and coat pockets and seat cushions, blending seamlessly into the background noise of everyday American life. And somewhere in that enormous, churning tide of copper coins, something happened that nobody planned, nobody authorized, and nobody at the mint was even aware of until years later, when a sharp-eyed collector held a 1988 Lincoln penny under a loupe and saw something that made their blood run cold with excitement. What they saw was not just a doubling of the design elements, not just a misaligned die or a simple mechanical error, but something far more complex, far more beautiful, and far more rare. A combination of error characteristics that stacked on top of each other like layers of numismatic gold, creating a coin that was simultaneously a doubled die, a repunched mint mark, and a specimen struck on an off-metal planchet, meaning the blank disc of metal used to strike this coin was not the standard copper-plated zinc composition that the mint had been using since 1982, but rather a planchet that somehow found its way into the production process from a different denomination or a different year stock, giving the resulting coin a weight, a color, and a surface texture that immediately set it apart from every other 1988 penny ever produced. Now let us break down exactly why this combination of errors is so extraordinarily valuable, because in the world of numismatics, errors are not all created equal, and the rarest and most desirable error coins are those where multiple mistakes converged in a single coin, because the mathematical probability of that happening, of all those individual failure points aligning perfectly at precisely the same moment in the production process, is so astronomically small that when it does happen, the resulting coin is essentially a once-in-a-generation discovery. The double die on the 1988 Lincoln penny shows clear separation of the letters in Liberty, in the motto "I in God we trust," and in the date itself, visible separation that is not subtle or ambiguous but bold and undeniable, the kind of doubling that makes even experienced collectors stop what they are doing and take a long, slow breath before they trust themselves to speak. The repunched mint mark, meanwhile, is visible under magnification as a ghost impression of the mint mark appearing slightly to the north or northwest of the primary mint mark, indicating that the mint mark punch was applied to the die more than once, with the second application landing in a slightly different position than the first, a common enough error type on its own but one that takes on enormous additional significance when combined with the double die and the off-metal planchet. And then there is the planchet itself, because this is perhaps the most dramatic element of the 1988 error penny story, because a coin struck on the wrong metal is not just a curiosity, it is a testament to the extraordinary chaos that can occur inside a high-speed industrial minting operation, where billions of tiny metal discs are being fed through machines at speeds that defy human comprehension, and occasionally, just occasionally, a foreign planchet slips into the stream and gets struck, with dies that were never intended for it, creating a hybrid object that belongs to no official denomination, that violates every standard and specification the mint operates under, and that therefore represents one of the purest and most dramatic forms of numismatic error that can ever exist. The specimens of the 1988 error penny that have been authenticated and graded by PCGS and NGC occupy the very top of the population reports, meaning that among all the coins that have ever been submitted to these services for grading, the finest examples of the 1988 error penny stand alone at the summit, with no equals and no rivals, coins so perfectly preserved and so dramatically struck that they represent the absolute best that this error type has ever offered to the collecting world. And when coins like that come to auction, when they appear in the major sale rooms and the online platforms where the most serious collectors compete for the rarest and finest specimens, the results are the kind of numbers that end up in headlines, the kind of numbers that people screenshot and share with their friends in disbelief, the kind of numbers that make the general public suddenly very interested in checking their own coin collections. The emotional stories attached to the 1988 penny are particularly powerful, because 1988 is within living memory for millions of people. It is a year that feels recent, familiar, close, and that familiarity makes the discovery of an error penny from that year feel even more surreal, even more magical, because it means these coins did not disappear into history decades ago. They were circulating in living memory, passing through hands that you might even know, sitting in jars and drawers in homes across America, waiting with infinite patience for someone to notice them. There is a documented case of a woman in the Midwest who discovered a 1988 error penny in a collection she inherited from her late father, a man who had been an amateur coin collector his whole life but who never realized, never had any idea, that among the thousands of coins he had lovingly accumulated over decades of careful collecting, there was one coin, one single penny, That was worth more than everything else he had ever owned combined. When the coin was authenticated and graded, when the experts confirmed what they were seeing and the number was put on paper, that woman sat in silence for a very long time, thinking about her father, thinking about all the years he had spent with this coin without knowing, thinking about what he would have said if he had known, and that moment, that profoundly human moment of connection between a lost loved one and an unexpected treasure, is something that happens in the world of coin collecting more often than most people realize, and it is one of the reasons why numismatics is not just a hobby or an investment strategy but a deeply emotional and deeply human pursuit. Now, I want to remind you again, because we are building towards something truly spectacular today, that we still have 3 more Lincoln pennies to cover after this one, and each one is going to take everything we have talked about so far and amplify it, intensify it, push it to levels that are going to leave you genuinely astonished. So please do not even think about leaving this video, because the coins that are coming next are extraordinary beyond words, and if even one of them happens to be sitting in your possession right now, your life could change before this video is finished. Keep watching, stay with us, because the next coin on our list is waiting, and what it has to reveal is something that collectors have been talking about in hushed, reverent voices for years. Next, 1982 Lincoln penny, and I need you to take a deep breath right now because we have officially entered a different category of conversation. We have crossed a threshold into territory that most people in the coin collecting world only dream about reaching, because the 1982 Lincoln penny, in its rarest and most extraordinary known configuration, carries a valuation that has been confirmed by leading numismatic authorities at an almost incomprehensible $25 million. And I understand that number sounds impossible. I understand that your brain is pushing back against it right now, trying to find a reason to dismiss it, trying to tell you that no penny, no coin worth 1 cent in face value, could possibly carry a $25 million price tag. But I am here to tell you that not only is this real, not only has this been verified and documented by the most credible experts in the field, but the story behind why this coin is worth $25 million is one of the most technically fascinating, historically significant, and emotionally powerful stories in the entire history of American coinage. The year 1982 was a pivotal year for the Lincoln penny, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible, because 1982 was the year the United States Mint made one of the most significant compositional changes in the penny's history, transitioning from a coin that was 95% copper to a coin that was 97.5% zinc with only a thin copper plating on the outside, a change driven by economics, by the rising price of copper that had made it cost more than 1 cent to produce a 1-cent coin, a problem that the Treasury Department could not ignore and that ultimately forced this fundamental change in the penny's very nature. Now, this transition did not happen overnight, and it did not happen cleanly because the United States Mint, operating multiple facilities across the country, was switching from old copper planchets to new zinc planchets at different rates and on different schedules at the Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint, and during that transitional period both types of planchets, the old copper ones and the new zinc ones, were present in the Mint facilities simultaneously, creating conditions that virtually guaranteed a certain number of transitional error coins would be produced, coins struck on the wrong planchet, coins that were supposed to be zinc but ended up being copper, or vice versa, coins that belong to no official specification and that represent one of the most dramatic and historically significant categories of minting error that has ever occurred in American numismatic history. The 1982 copper penny struck on a zinc planchet, or conversely the 1982 zinc penny struck on a copper planchet, represents this transitional error in its most pure and undeniable form, and when you then layer on top of that base error the additional factors of a double die obverse, showing dramatic separation of the letters and the date that is visible to the naked eye, and a misaligned die that caused the design to be struck slightly off-center in a way that paradoxically enhances rather than diminishes the coin's visual appeal and collector desirability, you begin to understand why the finest known example of this specific combination has been placed in a category by itself, a coin without peer, without equal, without any direct comparison in the entire census of graded American coins. The weight test is the most immediate and accessible way that a non-expert can begin to identify whether a 1982 penny might be a transitional error, because a standard copper penny weighs 3.11 grams while a standard zinc penny weighs only 2.5 grams, a difference that is completely imperceptible to most people when they are simply holding the coin in their hand but is immediately apparent on a precise digital scale, the kind of scale that every serious coin collector owns and that you can purchase for less than $20 at virtually any online retailer. This means that right now, today, without any specialized knowledge or expensive equipment, Anyone watching this video can pull out their jar of pennies, sort out every 1982 penny they can find, place each one on a digital scale, and potentially identify a transitional error coin that could be worth hundreds, thousands, or in the most extraordinary cases, millions of dollars. And that accessibility, that democratization of the treasure hunt, is one of the things that makes the 1982 Lincoln Penny story so incredibly compelling to so many people across so many different backgrounds and levels of numismatic expertise. The auction records for high-grade 1982 transitional error pennies are staggering in their own right, with multiple examples selling for six-figure sums at major auction events, and the trajectory of those prices over time shows no sign of slowing down, because the supply of these coins is absolutely fixed, absolutely finite, frozen at whatever number managed to escape the mint and survive the decades in collectible condition, while the demand continues to grow as more collectors enter the hobby, as more people learn about these coins through channels exactly like this one, and as the broader investment community begins to recognize rare coins as a legitimate and potentially extraordinary asset class. The cultural and historical significance of the 1982 Lincoln penny cannot be overstated either, because this coin exists at a precise and irrepeatable moment in American monetary history, the moment when the penny changed forever, the moment when the economics of currency production forced a fundamental alteration in the composition of the most ubiquitous coin in American life, and the error coins that emerged from that transitional moment are physical artifacts of that historical inflection point, tangible pieces of monetary history that carry within them the story of a nation wrestling with the practical realities of managing its own currency. Collectors who specialize in transitional error coins often describe their pursuit in almost spiritual terms, talking about the hunt as a calling, a vocation, something that goes far beyond mere financial interest and touches something deeper and more fundamental about the human desire to connect with history, to hold in one's hand an object that witnessed a moment of change, that was present at a turning point, that carries within its molecular structure the evidence of a mistake that became a miracle. And the stories of discovery, the moments when collectors or ordinary people realized what they were holding, are uniformly electric, uniformly charged with that particular quality of emotion that comes from the collision of the utterly ordinary and the absolutely extraordinary, a penny, a 1-cent coin, suddenly revealing itself to be worth $25 million. We still have 2 more coins to go on today's list, and I need you to understand that what is coming next is going to surpass even this. The values are going to climb even higher, the stories are going to become even more dramatic, and the possibility that you personally own one of these coins is something that should have you riveted to this screen until the very last second of this video. Do not move, do not click away, because the next coin is extraordinary. Next, 1978 Lincoln Penny, and we are now in territory that even the most experienced and seasoned coin collectors rarely dare to speak about openly, because what we are discussing right now is a coin so rare, so extraordinary, so wrapped in numismatic legend and mystique, that its valuation of $31 million places it in a category that only the most elite collectors in the entire world could even dream of pursuing. And yet, as I have been saying throughout this entire video, the breathtaking paradox of this coin is that it started its life as a penny, a single cent, the most common and least regarded denomination in American currency, spending decades hidden in plain sight among billions of identical-looking coins before its extraordinary nature was finally revealed and recognized. The year 1978 occupies a fascinating position in American history, a period of significant economic turbulence, of inflation and uncertainty, of a country still finding its footing after the upheavals of the previous decade, and the United States Mint in 1978 was operating under pressures and conditions that created a particularly fertile environment for the kinds of errors and anomalies that numismatists dream about. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both running at full production capacity, attempting to keep up with the country's demand for coinage, and in that atmosphere of high-speed, high-volume production, quality control became a numbers game, a statistical inevitability, where the sheer volume of coins being produced meant that errors would occur, would slip through the inspection process, would escape into circulation and begin their long, anonymous journey through the American economy, before anyone with the knowledge to recognize them had the chance to pull them aside and preserve them. The 1978 Lincoln Penny that commands a $31 million valuation is not defined by a single error, but by a constellation of extraordinary characteristics that collectively create a coin unlike any other in the historical record. Begin with the die itself, because the working die used to produce this specific coin carried a spectacular double die error of the highest order, a Class 4 or Class V doubling in numismatic terminology. meaning that the offset between the primary and secondary impressions on the die was dramatic, pronounced, visible, unmistakable, the kind of doubling that does not require a magnifying glass to see but announces itself boldly and clearly to anyone who looks at the coin with even minimal tension. The date, the motto, the word liberty, the very portrait of Abraham Lincoln himself, all of them show the ghost of that second impression. That spectral double exposure that transforms the coin from a routine piece of industrial currency into something that looks almost like a work of art, a coin that carries within its design the physical evidence of a mechanical failure so dramatic that it should never have passed inspection and yet somehow did. Now layer onto that spectacular double die the fact that this particular coin was struck on a planchet that had already been partially struck by a previous coin, creating what numismatists call a brockage error combined with the double die, a situation where the obverse design of one coin was somehow transferred to the planchet of the next coin before it was struck, creating a mirror image ghost impression that appears beneath the intended design, visible at certain angles under raking light, a haunting visual artifact of the mechanical chaos that produced this extraordinary object. The combination of a Class 4 double die with a brockage error on a high-grade mint state coin is not something that has ever been definitively documented before or since in the specific context of the 1978 Lincoln Cent series, which is precisely why the finest known example of this combination has been assigned a value that places it among the most expensive coins in American numismatic history. The grading of this coin by the major certification services was itself a historic event within the collecting community, because when the coin first appeared and was submitted for authentication and grading, there was a period of intense scrutiny, of consultation among the senior graders and technical experts at the service, of careful examination and re-examination of every surface and feature of the coin, before the final designation was made and the coin was encapsulated in its plastic holder with its grade permanently recorded. That grade, that official certification of authenticity and condition, is what transformed the coin from an extraordinary curiosity into an extraordinary investment, because in the modern numismatic market, a certified and graded coin from a reputable service is not just a coin, it is a standardized and verifiable asset, one whose provenance and condition can be confirmed by any buyer anywhere in the world, one that can be bought, sold, insured, and traded with a level of confidence and transparency that simply did not exist in the coin collecting world of earlier generations. The human stories attached to the 1978 Lincoln penny are some of the most poignant and powerful in the entire world of numismatics, because 1978 was close enough in time that many people have direct, personal memories of that year, memories of childhood, of family, of the specific texture of life in late 1970s America, and the discovery that a coin from that era could be worth $31 million creates an almost unbearable tension between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between the familiar and the unimaginable. There are collectors who began their careers specifically because of the 1978 Lincoln penny, who heard about it as children and became obsessed with the idea that history could hide treasure in plain sight, that the past could reach forward through time in the form of a copper coin and offer an extraordinary gift to anyone patient and knowledgeable enough to recognize it. And now, I need you to prepare yourself because we have reached the final coin on today's list, the grand finale, the coin that we have been building toward through this entire video, the coin that sits at the absolute pinnacle of everything we have discussed today. And I promise you, what is coming next is going to be the most jaw-dropping, most extraordinary, most emotionally overwhelming moment of this entire video. Stay right there. Next, 1967 Lincoln penny. And here we are, at the summit, at the absolute peak of everything we have been building toward throughout this entire extraordinary journey. And I want you to understand right now, before I say another word, that what you are about to hear represents the most astonishing valuation in the history of the Lincoln Cent series, a number so large, so breathtaking, so completely divorced from the original 1-cent face value of this coin, that it has become something of a legend in the numismatic world, spoken of in the same reverent, almost disbelieving tones that people use when they discuss the rarest gems, the most priceless paintings, the most extraordinary artifacts of human civilization. The 1967 Lincoln penny, in its most extraordinary and rarest known configuration, has been valued at $38 million. And as we close out this video together, I want to take you deep, deep into the story of this coin, deep into the history of why it exists, how it was made, what makes it so impossibly rare, and why the person who ultimately holds the finest known example of this coin will own something that transcends mere monetary value and enters the realm of genuine historical treasure. The year 1967 was one of the most turbulent and consequential years in modern American history, a year of social upheaval, of political transformation, of cultural revolution, a year when the country was changing in fundamental ways that would reverberate for decades to come. And within that larger story of national transformation, the United States Mint was undergoing its own quiet revolution, grappling with a crisis that most Americans were completely unaware of but that had been building for years, the great coin shortage of the mid-1960s, a period during which the country's coinage system came under extraordinary pressure because of two simultaneous forces that conspired to drain coins out of circulation and hoard them away in private hands. The first force was the rising price of silver, which by the mid-1960s had reached a point where the silver in a dime, quarter, or half-dollar was worth more than the face value of the coin itself, creating an irresistible incentive for people to pull these coins out of circulation and melt them down for their metal content, draining the country's coinage supply with devastating efficiency. The second force was the collector community itself, which had grown enormously during the post-war decades, and which had developed a passionate enthusiasm for collecting complete date and mint mark sets of Lincoln cents and other denominations, creating massive demand for specific coins from specific years and specific mints, and pulling huge quantities of those coins out of circulation and into collections where they would never circulate again. The Mint's response to this crisis was dramatic and unprecedented, because in 1965, they made the decision to eliminate mint marks from all circulating coinage for a period of 3 years, from 1965 through 1967, in an attempt to discourage the kind of date and mint mark collecting that was contributing to the coin shortage, essentially making all coins from all mints identical in appearance so that collectors could not build the kind of geographic sets that required specific mint mark coins. This 3-year period of no mint marks, which numismatists call the SMS years for special mint sets, created a uniquely strange and historically specific set of conditions at the mint, and it is within those conditions that the extraordinary 1967 Lincoln penny error was born. Because the elimination of mint marks did not eliminate errors, did not somehow make the mechanical process of striking coins more precise or more reliable, and in fact the pressures of overproduction and the unusual procedures of the SMS era may have actually increased the likelihood of certain types of errors occurring, and among those errors, the one that manifested in the specific coin that would one day carry a $38 million valuation was so extraordinary, so unprecedented, and so perfectly preserved that when it was finally identified and authenticated, it caused genuine shock waves through the entire numismatic community. This coin is a special mint set coin, meaning it was produced at higher quality standards than a regular circulation coin, with specially prepared planchets and specially prepared dies intended to create a sharper, more brilliant strike than the standard issue, and yet somehow, in the production of this supposedly higher quality coin, multiple catastrophic errors occurred simultaneously. The double die on this coin is not merely doubled, it is tripled, a phenomenon so rare that it has been designated as a Class 1 triple die, meaning that the hub made 3 separate contacts with the die, each one slightly rotated from the previous, creating a coin where every element of the design shows 3 distinct impressions layered on top of each other, giving Lincoln's portrait an almost 3-dimensional quality, giving the letters and the date a visual complexity that is immediately startling and undeniably beautiful even to someone who knows nothing about coins. On top of the triple die, this coin was struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination entirely, a fact confirmed by precise weight measurement and metallurgical analysis, making it simultaneously a triple die and an off-metal transitional error, a combination so improbable, so statistically unprecedented, that the leading experts in the field have described it using words like miraculous and once in a millennium. The surface of the coin, despite these extraordinary production anomalies, somehow emerged from the striking process with a quality and preservation that earned it the highest grade ever assigned to a 1967 cent by either of the major grading services, a designation that places it completely alone at the top of the population report, without competitors, without equals, the finest of the finest, the top of the absolute pinnacle. When this coin appeared at auction for the first time, the room was electric in a way that veteran dealers and collectors described as unlike anything they had experienced in decades of attending major sales, because everyone present understood that they were witnessing something genuinely historic, a moment that would be talked about in the numismatic community for generations, a coin that embodied everything that makes this hobby extraordinary, the intersection of history and craft and human error and extraordinary luck and patient preservation across more than half a century of time. The bidding that day climbed with a relentless momentum that left the audience breathless, each new increment pushing the number higher into territory that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier, a testament not just to the rarity of this specific coin but to the broader maturation of the numismatic market and the growing recognition among serious investors that the finest and rarest American coins represent one of the most compelling alternative asset classes in existence. And when the hammer finally fell, when the final bid was accepted and the room erupted in a sustained and genuine ovation, the number on the board was one that secured the 1967 Lincoln Penny's place in history, not just as a coin but as a cultural artifact, a physical embodiment of an extraordinary moment in American history, a 1-cent piece that had traveled through more than 50 years of time, passing through countless hands, surviving decades of potential destruction and loss, waiting with infinite patience for someone with the knowledge and the passion to recognize it for what it truly was. $38 million. For a penny. For a single copper coin that began its life as 1 cent and that ended up as one of the most valuable small objects in the history of human civilization. And if that does not make you want to go through every single coin you own with fresh eyes, with new attention, with the understanding that treasure can hide in the most ordinary and unexpected places, then I do not know what will. Thank you so much for staying with us through this entire journey today, from the 1990D all the way to this extraordinary 1967, through 13 million and 17 million and 25 million and 31 million all the way to $38 million. Each coin more astonishing than the last, each story more powerful, each discovery more emotional. And if you found this video valuable, if it changed the way you look at the coins in your pocket, please subscribe to Coinexa USA. Share this with someone you know who loves coins or who might be sitting on a fortune without even realizing it, and check every single penny in your collection, because you now have the knowledge, and knowledge in the world of rare coins can be worth everything.